But I'm Jakob. I'm with BlockScience. We're an engineering and research team. And what I'm presenting today, or what I want to present to others, is a governance modules library, especially a recent grant that we applied for and also got, and are now rather completing. And now we want to open it up to others, see if anybody wants to contribute to this governance research. Myself, I've been researching and working on crypto, especially governance and economics, for I think about 7 years now. It's been a while. Did my PhD at the Research Institute for Crypto Economics, and now I've been at BlockScience for about 1.5 years. Obviously, we've worked with Anki in the past, also Alejo, on neural quorum governance. And as part of that, we also softly kickstarted the governance modules library back then. And to really bootstrap it, we applied for a grant, which is now coming to completion. And we have plans for another grant to populate it, but I'll tell you more about that in a bit. I'll introduce the other contributors from my team as well. So we've got Danilo, who is one of our senior research engineers, mainly in computational science. David contributed quite a bit. He's also one of the senior research engineers. He deals more with data and platforms. Frederick especially has been a bit more on the ground with me and contributed to the repo itself. Frederick has also set up the CIP process for Cardano way back when, and you might recognize that has influenced some of our decisions quite a bit. And then, of course, I am Jakob, and I sort of own this project on our end. So to also give a bit of an idea of BlockScience, we kind of see ourselves as an engineering firm, but what we really do is just research. So we, on one hand, do all sorts of blue sky research in governance, in economics, in technology areas. We split the company into 3 pods as well for that. But we finance that through doing applied research for other organizations, DAOs, protocols, any sort of organizational form that has popped up. We do primarily Web3, but not exclusively. So we have a couple of non-Web3 projects as well. Now, I've put this up because when I talk about what we've did a little bit later, this is pretty much what we adhere to. So this is how we structure more or less all of our projects through this engineering lifecycle. I think I have one more a little bit later, but just to let you know where we're coming from. So we pretty much exclusively day-to-day do research either on topics that we find interesting and valuable to the world at large, or we apply the research that we've done for specific protocols, projects, etc., and bring it into practice. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but essentially we see ourselves as shrinking the gap through growing the capabilities and really trying to build a sustainable future. We are not really happy with how engineering is often done, especially in the Web3 space. We have often seen sort of unsustainable methods being applied. So we really adhere to a very traditional engineering process for ourselves. Now, the reason for why we're doing this workshop is because we've done in the past some work with SDF, of course. We worked on neural quorum governance. We have 3 blogs that describe how we got there. We're currently still involved on that front, where we do monitoring and reporting and pretty much analyze the rounds of voting to give feedback on how to tune and maybe change and adapt the mechanism. Now, for us, that's pretty important because we don't believe that governance just works forever and you just set it up once and then it happens. A big part for us in governance is monitoring and being able to adapt efficiently. Our goal is always to open source everything, to hand everything over to communities whenever it is feasible. So similarly, also our reporting pipeline, we hope to eventually be able to just open source and give to the community. We've written 3 articles about it, and the last one is probably the most relevant for today. As part of this initial work, we also started this library for governance modules. I'll talk in a little bit about why that is, why we had to do that, or we felt we needed to do that. But note that I'm not going to talk too much about neural quorum governance today. I'm talking about this GML, the governance modules library. Now, for us, governance research is pretty much happening every day. And one thing that we always struggle with is that there's no good collections of governance. There's lists of articles, and there's some things that call themselves libraries, but it's very non-standardized. It's block articles. Sometimes it's limited, and the descriptions don't really help you to understand why these things were chosen. I'm also a proponent of like contextual governance. I don't think plug-and-play governance is really the way to go. There's always things to tune to make it contextual to a local community rather than having one size fits all. Now, the problem for us is always that when we use any sort of prior research and build upon it, we don't really have standardized descriptions of it. And oftentimes these things are very non-agnostic to the implementation. So we are obviously very active in different L1 communities, from Ethereum to Stellar to Cardano. We don't really care where it happens. We just want to build good governance. But the problem is that a lot of these governance applications are built with one ecosystem in mind and are sometimes very hard to adapt. And then the last part is something that you will also see quite reflected in what we've structured, which is that very rarely you get the learnings of where this isn't applicable, or where it didn't work well, or what the requirements to build it were in the first place. So for us, what we have envisioned is really a place where governance can be collected, open source, for anybody to use, for anybody to build upon, for anybody to collaborate on it. Doesn't matter if you come from Ethereum, from Stellar, or anywhere else, and also have a reasonably rigorous process to describe what is this for, what does this work with, where does it not work, what have you learned from it. So that was sort of the goal that we set out with, and we structured that for an SCF grant, and had really four deliverables for this, or four goals. So on one hand, we wanted to implement community backlogs, and with that we mean ways for the community to contribute in a structured way to governance, research, and implementation. We wanted to and did write operating procedure guidelines, and now where we're at is we really want to facilitate maintainers, and by maintainers we mean two categories of contributors. One is actually help maintaining this. It is definitely a bit of work to facilitate such a collaboration, but also to contribute through governance. If anybody has governance that they're working on and they find the structure that we bootstrap useful or want to adapt the structure, we're very, very happy to help facilitate that. Now, the future vision is a bit more medium term, I would say. Currently, this is not community owned. Currently, this is structured through an SCF grant. It lives in an SDF Gitbook. What we want in the future is to really have community ownership of this, have open source research accessible to anybody, fully agnostic, a research and design governance library where anybody can contribute and pick and implement things, have it accessible to people. And I will show later why or how that was reflected in some of our decisions. And obviously an active contribution pipeline would be great. But what is really important for us is also a shared understanding of applicable and non-applicable areas so that governance ecosystems can actually benefit from each other and we don't build more silos again. At the bottom, I'm very happy to thank Anki for a little bit of a shout out in the recent Road Ahead blog, where she described also one of the objectives for the accessible and agnostic library. Now, this is one of the visions. Throughout this slide deck, you will probably see a couple of diagrams. Digital crayons are a little bit of my happy place, so I depict almost everything in these diagrams. And I would really love to see, even though that is a simplistic, artistic representation, to have all sorts of different governance modules that are described with requirements, with lists of prior implementations, links to other research, specifications, instructions if anybody wants to implement this, ideally in an agnostic fashion. How do you tune this? What are the parameters in this? What do the parameters mean? What will they change? But also something that is usually for us quite important, either simulation or reference implementations. And for now, we start with Python or Rust, but something tangible that shows you that how the logic works, or even lets you test it directly in a simulation framework. We do have a very big focus on simulations. We believe building models of things and testing things is super important. And we generally use CAD, which is a simulation framework that we built because there were no good alternatives to model and simulate complex systems. And of course, we open sourced it so that anybody can use it. But we also don't want to force others to write simulation frameworks. So any sort of toy model, etc., is already, or just pseudocode is already very helpful for these. Now, where are we at right now? Currently, the GML lives in the SDF Gitbook that is already accessible. We have a contribution pipeline that lives currently in our own repo. It is currently not very well populated. We populated with neuroquorum governance, of course, and some sketches of ideas. We have started to bootstrap, and this initial pipeline that we have for this governance research contributions is oriented on our own practices and experiences. And we do absolutely recognize that these are not ideal for everybody. So I'm also looking to this group to let us know of what do you need? How would you go about this? How would you change some of these things? So this is, we generally try to bootstrap things by actually doing something and being aware that things might not be perfect, but that they can be changed as much as possible. Here, so this is how the GML currently looks. As you can see, there's neural governance, quorum delegation, the trust graph bonus, which is one of the neurons, and then one identity management idea that we sketched out, but that is not fully specified yet. When I go about the process that we think about, again, as I said before, we generally stick to this engineering design process, which goes from ideation and conceptualization to requirements and designs, implementation, integration, and testing, and then eventually operations and maintenance. This is taken from one of our model-based systems engineering slides. So the below is a couple of different research initiatives that we have to facilitate this, and all of these will, or either are open sourced or will be open sourced if they're not fully ready yet. Again, diagrams. This was the initial vision for how this could be used, so that we, you see on the right, have a governance modules library that can actually be consumed and used by dApps and DAOs, so that people can actually put that research into practice for wherever the local context permits it. I'm not going to go too much into this because this was a bit of an early sketch. This is a bit of a later sketch. And this is sort of the pipeline of how things move through this. So initially on the left, you can see that anybody can, we call this a desire, have an idea, either a pre-existing one or one that they come up with themselves, that they believe should eventually be in the Gitbook or in the GML, wherever it lives at that point. As I said before, we didn't want to build another inaccessible platform or pipeline. So aside from general GitHub or Git PR processes, we also want to provide, especially, and I come from social science originally, people who are not so familiar with Git processes, also a way to participate. And this is what you see in this slightly pink box on the top left, which is an input form. Now it moves to the desired backlog, where we're gathering who proposed this, give us a summary, an abstract of this. What is your why statement? Why do you think this is important? A problem statement, and at least one potential application. And this process serves also to maintainers to know when to move things through. When these conditions are met, it goes to the design backlog, where we describe requirements, discovered solutions, decisions on a solution. So what is the decision space for this solution and a rationale for it? And then when those conditions are met, to a development backlog. Oh, that box is incorrect, but I'll show you in a second what is in there. And then eventually when these things are done, we move it officially as a completed module into the GML for everybody to use. It is transparent throughout, so anybody can see where current ideas are, where in the backlog they currently find themselves, and what is missing, so that anybody can contribute and say, I might not be good at describing requirements, but I'm reasonably good at explaining why a certain decision might be better than another. So here, this should be the updated one, yes. We have some conditions for when things are in which backlog. This is described here, as I said before. Now the dev backlog holds then a specification, implementation instructions, tuning guidelines, which we find to be oftentimes very much excluded from blog articles and instructions. What do the parameters really do? What changes? Can you maybe show us a little bit of the effects? And then once these things are done, they can be moved into GML. And as you can see here as well, there's a couple of different roles that are needed there. In the beginning, likely a desires moderator and the design moderator and the dev moderator can be fulfilled by the same person. If this becomes really active, it might make sense to split this into different actual people. And also in the beginning, it's likely that I'll start as the initial one that does all of these things, but hopefully I can find other people who find this interesting enough and want to contribute. So I also want to be honest about some decisions that we made. We initially thought we would skip GitHub as the main platform and do it all within Gitbook, but we decided against that. The functionality is not exactly there where we wanted. It has primarily paid roles, while on GitHub, of course, we can have a lot more maintainers and contributors, and also a couple of different areas. We'll describe them all for why we went against them. We decided for a multi-stage approach. If you look at this, it looks pretty complicated. We want people to contribute to research, but for now we wanted to over-specify this and have a lot of areas that people can critique and say, this is not what we actually need, or this is not actually helpful. We also decided to not just have a PR process or pull request process, but also forums and discussions, so people can actually contribute to text-based as well. And also, as you can see, the last backlog has this description for simulations or a reference implementation. We decided for either Python or Rust because those are very widely used. And we decided to have that as a mandatory part if it should be in the governance modules library. Now, all of these things can be changed, so we're not setting these in stone. We're pretty much saying this is an initial condition. Let's discuss and see how other people do their research, how other people do their engineering, and let's converge on a workflow that helps everybody. Obviously, roles and responsibilities, the final outcome. Should it be Rust and Python? Who owns these repos? Who owns the governance modules library? Who owns artifacts that are created in between? All of these things are, of course, changeable overall. Now, I will probably switch quickly over just to think you should see that still. Check. You should see the repo right now. If you could let me know that we're still not on the slides.
Yeah, no, I can see it.
All right, great. So we've set up this first repo. This is for contributions. Right now, it only holds one meta governance module that pretty much describes what this looks like. So this is, as you can see, or if you're familiar with EIP, CIP processes, etc., has a very similar structure in the setup, and basically describes what we're doing and how we're doing it, how we're moving things through. Now, it also holds, of course, our nice little diagrams. I can walk through how this actually works in practice, but we have set up a form. This is currently living on Google, not very ideal. Obviously has a maintainers sheet where these things are put into. And this really serves to give everybody who's not that familiar with PR processes to contribute. Now, I can show the entire PR process as well if that's interested. I think I'll probably reserve it for a little bit later to see if it is if people are interested in that. But it follows a very regular structure. Now I'll go quickly to, it is also in this repo, so how to submit a new governance module. What is this entire thing? How can you become a maintainer? So we really try to describe how people can be included in this. I'll quickly go back here. I'll reserve this for later and quickly talk about future directions before I want to open this up to see if people actually would want to use something like this. But what is currently needed? So we're on one hand looking for people that find contributing to this valuable by being a maintainer. So we're probably going to set up a monthly meeting. Probably also includes occasional checking and moving these items through the stages through PRs. People would probably need some familiarity with Git processes and an interest in governance. The initial contribution we expect are probably reasonably low. I will explain in a second why. And if you're at any point interested, if you're in this call, let me know. But there's also a section, of course, on how that works. And then on the other hand, we're of course also looking for community members that have governance module ideas or that are actively working on something and then find such a library valuable to put it in to help us populate it. Contributions can be made to new or existing modules, and we'll likely, BlockScience will likely apply for a follow-up grant just to contribute a bunch of research into this and populate initially. So then we'll do the initial round of maintenance, but also the initial round of population of things like conviction voting, etc., to bring them into a form where people can learn and implement them in their own ways. So we want you. If anybody is interested, please let me know. And I will open this up for a little bit of a discussion. If anybody is interested in seeing how items move through the backlogs, I'm happy to switch to VS Code or something and show how you fork a repo and how you go through it, how you upload a new a module. But I think for that process, it might make sense for me to do a screen capture and put it on the repo itself, so that everybody knows the process. To also, I'm not going to have an entire Git tutorial by me, because there's obviously people who have described this a lot better. I see helping does not mean breaking it. No. But yeah, at this stage, I think this is enough of a frontal input of where we are and what we want to do. So please, at any point, please also feel free to criticize this. I come from academia. I love to be criticized on these things. If you think that this is way too rigid, if it is way too overspecified, if you think that other things would be useful, please let me know.